Hello and welcome to Season 5, Episode 9 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop,
I'm Mark Bishop.
and we are, of course, reading Austin Freeman's Tolkien Dogmatics, Theology Through Mythology, with the maker of Middle-earth. And this time we are talking about Chapter 8, Satan and Demons. A chapter that I have to admit before we begin here, I have not read. I read the wrong chapter. I skipped a chapter ahead and did not do my assigned reading for the week. In my defense, I've been very busy. I am in Washington, D.C., so this is the most remote that we have ever done this podcast. But yeah, I just completely skipped ahead because we were just talking about evil and sin last time. And for some reason, I was thinking evil and sin and Satan and demons were the same chapter, and I skipped ahead to the next chapter. So he'll be filling me in as we go along, and I'll try and keep up with what's written in the book.
Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of overlapping themes. I'm not sure
Mhm.
why he decided to do two separate chapters. I am also experiencing some technical difficulties in that my microphone every once in a while, and by once in a while, I mean frequently, will randomly pop and crack, and I feel as if I'm going to be electrocuted. So it's keeping me on edge, but I'm too cheap to get a new microphone. So we'll just run with it. Satan and demons. So
Yeah,
I'm
Satan and
gonna
demons.
have to take the lead on here, and we're doing it remotely, as you said, because you're working for what some people consider to be one of the main demons in Washington D.C. That being Josh Hawley, because of course he wants to change things, and that can't happen. Anywho, so Satan. There's a lot of overlap with this chapter and the last one, so you'll be able to pipe in. But he's the main Satan character in Tolkien's books would be that Morgoth,
Mhm.
which is basically the Christian Satan type character, but also has that Morgoth and not Sauron is the devil of Christian theology. Because even though Sauron might be very powerful and he's one of Satan's servants, he is not like the Satan character.
Mhm.
But haven't we already covered that in the last chapter and maybe two other chapters?
We've kind of mentioned that a bit, but I think it is an important distinction to make because, a lot of people, who have, some level of knowledge about the Lord of the Rings and Tolkien immediately assume, okay, Sauron is the ultimate evil and he's the worst thing to ever happen and blah, 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 blah. But really, Sauron is kind of a side figure that kind of the whole of the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit is somewhat of an accident itself, separate from Tolkien's, main story that he was working with, his main mythology of the Silmarillion stories. And so I think it is important to note that there is a very much bigger evil there that is Morgoth, who is basically the embodiment of evil and discord itself, and everything horrible and stuff like that. And so Sauron is really just a servant who was kind of a minor thing in some of the earliest Silmarillion stuff, and he was adapted from the necromancer that was mentioned in The Hobbit, and from there that necromancer became Sauron, and the whole ring plot came from there. But yeah, no, it is important to mention that there is an actual devil, and that is Morgoth.
Is the necromancer character the same character, or is he just kind of like a different character that has the same kind of creative impulse?
Originally, he was something unnamed. It was just a plot device to get Gandalf away from the dwarves in Bilbo so that they could have their own little adventure as they go through Mirkwood and whatever, and Gandalf needed to be somewhere else. But from there, he realized, okay, if we're adapting the ring into something bigger, that's the necromancer is also where we're going to take this. That is the same figure as Sauron. So yeah, they are the same character in the end, but not intentionally at first.
Well, yeah, and the book goes on in some detail about saying that Sauron represents something as close to complete evil as metaphysically possible, which I thought was kind of interesting because we've talked about whether anyone other than God can actually destroy a sentient being, that type of thing. But anyways, so the next section in the book is the fall of Satan in Middle Earth, and all of the stories that he has in there. Is there's some rebel, like the Satan character, some rebel who seeks worship for himself instead of worshiping God, which is really Satan's story. And that brings to mind, I'm going to go off topic. There was a editorial in our local paper about by some young person who's too stupid to know better. Wrote an editorial. The last editorial she wrote was how the glories of abortion on demand, and that which goes over really well in our community for a local paper. And this last week was a kind of a follow-up, which is why she left the church. And she used to be Catholic, but she doesn't say that specifically. I just know that she used to be Catholic. And she talks about how instead of going to church now, because of some made up stories that were not true about what people said to her in church, which I know, it's just one of those kind of fanciful BS liberal stories. She now, goes to the park, takes a walk, or walks her dog, and she has a conversation with God. And it's such a self-worship type of story, and doesn't want to abide by any rules or really submit to any sort of concept of God's rules or order, whether it's Catholic or some other denomination. They just want to make their own rules. So it kind of reminds me of the seminal Satan story, and in Tolkien's stories about his bad beings, which they are just trying to aggregate power and worship themselves, which I think a lot of people do at an individual level. And for Tolkien, the author mentions, reminds us that nothing that basically evil, nothing begins by desiring evil for itself. So like Tolkien's view of it is that generally people aren't trying to just be evil. And I think that that's true, but that, like Satan and demons, may try to influence you and try to convince you that the bad things that you want to do are good, and that seems to be a theme, through the Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, where it's a dramatization of kind of a corrupting influence to try to convince you what you're doing, even though it's wrong in a sense. You believe you're doing it for the right reasons, or you're trying to do a good thing. And the whole idea behind Satan is that I'm trying to think of Melkor, right? Melkor was a bad guy, right?
Yes, Melkor is the same dude as Morgoth.
Yeah, I always get those confused because like Morgoth and Melkor, but he kind of separated himself from God's plan and what he's supposed to be doing, because he was attempting to raise his light, his being up to God's level, and instead descended into darkness and nothingness ultimately, trying to replace God with himself and try to aggregate power and that kind of stuff to himself. Any thoughts about Melkor, Morgoth, and the Satan story?
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned this, I think, a couple episodes ago, maybe just last episode, but it's that connection between Melkor and Lucifer, in that their names, in some capacity, both, mean light or, power of some sort. So it's interesting that you have like these two characters where it's like, it's, the most evil people tend to be the ones that, I think have the most power, or maybe, people are equally evil, but, the ones with the most power can wield it the best. But it's like, it's always that desire of, I'm not doing, what's wrong for everybody else, or what's wrong for me, or what's wrong for God. I'm doing what is best for me. And that involves putting me above all else. And that's what you see with just a whole bunch of horrible people throughout history is, if you keep prioritizing yourself above everything else, you're going to be a horrible, horrible person.
Yes. So I like this quote, and I'm going to quote more from the book than I normally would because you haven't read it. But on page 215, there's a kind of a good excerpt here in the first full paragraph. Towards the end, it says, his fellow spirits, of course, know that God exists and must agree to his rebellion freely. But Melkor intends to hold even the knowledge of God from the children, imposing his own worship instead, a sort of intellectual bondage. This is the point at which Melkor becomes truly evil and even insane. And I think there's a parallel to the Lucifer story, and of course a lot of social commentary about people losing even the concept of God or religion in the present day. So Tolkien's stories and lessons resonate to the present day. I think a lot because of this kind of storyline of trying to even eliminate the concept of good and evil, or God and Satan, and that serves an evil purpose. Any thoughts?
I mean, I think you're spot on. It's so much of everything today is, well, everything's subjective. I can never really be wrong. There's no, one standard that holds us all. Why should I believe? And, the Christian definition of good and evil, I'm going to use my own definition because I'm more correct. So it's when you draw yourself away from any sort of universal sort of truth, then you just go down this path of, well, whatever I say is right is right. It's that, I think every time, we see people sort of move away from that sort of thing. It always becomes like we said, and I guess this is going to be a major theme throughout here, but it's worship of the self. It's always worship of what you want at the time, and it just becomes completely devoid of what is good and what is right if you just remove yourself from even knowing, what is good. Because these people, a lot of times in the modern day, it's impossible in this country at least to not know of Jesus and to not know of God. And so if you're making that choice to not believe in Jesus or to not believe in God, you are actively making that choice, I believe. And so I think you're making an active choice to turn away from, even trying to learn the truth or trying to learn about this idea. And you're sort of, subjecting yourself to that in a way, and you eventually turn into worship of the self.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's a topic I hadn't even really considered before, whether people really know the concept of Jesus. They know the name Jesus, and he's supposed to be real nice. I wonder how many people really have read the Bible, and really know the story, the word, such as But you're right. It's certainly widely available.
Yeah, it's not even really something that you even need to seek out. There's people on street corners everywhere yelling you about Jesus, and some of them might be completely wrong. But it's like, I think at some point it becomes a conscious decision to just tune it all out and just dismiss every single bit of it as fake. If it's everywhere, and I think that's a good thing, honestly. But I think people need to pay more attention to it. Yep.
So we mentioned Melkor, and then there's a discussion in the book following that about Sauron, and Sauron was not evil from the beginning, which I think is true also of Melkor. Correct?
Yes, that's true.
Creations, and there are good people, but then he falls, and then he fails or falls, and then I think Sauron falls a couple times, right?
Melkor's falls in the very beginning of like the music when he sings discord into the whole thing, and then from there he corrupts other Maiar to his cause and stuff like that.
Yeah, and so the author says, for a time he seems to, this is about Sauron, for times he seems to have reformed, perhaps even to himself, like he's truly reformed. He wants merely to hurry the reconstruction of Middle Earth along, but through his exertions of the will to control, he falls back into pride and lust for absolute power. So what's the story with that? I don't even know that backstory, where he's like trying to, do you know that? I mean, like where Sauron's working to, I guess this is some sort of prequel to the Hobbit, I guess.
I'm trying to think about where exactly that falls into place, because he does this, but falsely at one point in time. That's what I'm thinking of Sauron, when he pretends to like concede to the Númenóreans and pretends to help them, but he's really just serving Morgoth. This must be very early on in the beginning, because Morgoth was overthrown first, very, very early on, when it was really just the gods fighting amongst themselves before, elves and men really had a part to play at all. I think even before they, woke up or whatever really the story there is. So I'm thinking this is when Morgoth was chained at one point and he was overthrown from his fortress. And the Valar kind of welcomed back all the repentant Maiar, the Valar being the higher gods, Maiar being the lesser gods, and they sort of welcomed a lot of them back into the story of creation as they continue to sort of shape the world. So I think that's the point in time we're talking about. I'll have to brush up on my Silmarillion, but I think that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah, because he talks about it continues on 2:16. And then he goes the way of all tyrants. It begins with a desire to order well the lives of those under his charge, but his own conception of that order becomes its own end. He's unable to humble himself and ask for ultimate pardon, and his temporary turn back to good ends in an even greater relapse. So he begins to represent himself as Melkor's chief servant and high priest, and later as Morgoth returned, as himself the one God and king of the world, et cetera, et cetera. So backsliding back to it just because he couldn't too proud or to cede to somebody else's plan, like God's plan. He wants power and the worship, I guess, at that point.
Mhm.
So then I want to, what do I want to say? Oh yeah, yeah. And so then the author's taking some conclusions about what Tolkien believes about Satan, which I thought
Mhm.
was interesting. And he's talking about the moments of possible redemption for the Melkor or the Sauron characters after they do some bad things, really bad things. And there's an opportunity for repentance. So the author says we can surmise from this that Tolkien believes Satan at some point in the past had a choice to humble himself and receive forgiveness, or to confirm himself as an inveterate wicked, or self in inveterate wickedness, and he chose the latter.
Mhm.
And that Satan himself has freely closed off any possibility of ever asking for redemption or forgiveness again. And it's an interesting discussion, and it is fascinating to me that Tolkien would conceive of, well, could Satan be redeemed
Mhm.
now? You know, and
Mhm.
a lot of the modern fictional tales of Lucifer or Satan have a kind of a redemption arc, or almost like, um, and some of them were like, really he's just a misunderstood
Yeah.
a god,
Mhm.
uh, which I think is fascinating. Which in a way I guess he is an agent of God. I guess we all are. And Tolkien, I think, would believe that even the bad things that Satan would do would further God's plan
Mhm.
ultimately. So you gotta wonder, well, maybe that's part of the plan. Is he doing the Lord's work?
Yeah. I
And
mean,
I think,
do you think Satan could repent and be forgiven? Like actually? Because
well,
I think it's possible, and I think that's the question he's addressing. I think it is possible. It is a possibility because I think, God is merciful and he forgives anybody if they're truly repentant. But I think the impossibility is Satan being truly repentant. I think, if he was, I think God would forgive him, but I don't think he ever will be or ever was at any point in time.
yeah, I guess I don't know the answer to that.
Hmm.
And I think, I think I do believe that there are some people that will never repent. You
Hmm.
know, that's of course that is um, motivated some of my former job as a prosecutor. There's some people that you just have to lock away.
Hmm.
They will never stop doing bad things, and I often thought of, and I'm trying to remember if I quoted. I don't think I ended up quoting I know I thought about quoting the Terminator movie in pretty serious cases, but I thought I might trivialize it. But it comes to mind every time I have a really serious career criminal. That the scene where the um, the guy that came back from the future to save I'm forgetting the characters' names. Sarah Connor. So he's talking
Hmm.
to Sarah Connor, trying to explain to him that this Terminator is a machine, and the machine's there to kill her. He says something along the lines of, "That doesn't feel pity or pain or remorse, and it absolutely will not stop until you're dead." And I think that there's some parallels to that with Satan, demonic type people or creatures, in that they are just on a mission and they just won't stop.
Hmm.
They can. It's different than a robot. Robot's programmed, but I think there are some people that just will not. They will just refuse to choose to do a nice thing.
Hmm.
Uh, and that's not a lot of them. There are only so many truly bad criminals out there. A lot of them, you can be, some of the nicest people I've met were murderers. Pleasant conversationalists, good sense of humor, that type of thing. Anyway, so I don't view that as like a broad brush, but I think it's true of some people that just want to choose evil, and they just never will choose a non-evil path. And I
Hmm.
think Satan would be the ultimate, um, person or entity
Hmm.
to be an example of that attitude. But yeah, I guess, I mean, I don't know why God couldn't forgive him,
Hmm.
because I mean, some of them, is there some good that Satan is doing by tormenting the demonic souls of people that have been cast into hell?
I mean, I don't think Satan is doing anything good. I think I don't think I agree with you there. in
Isn't that
that.
serving a purpose? Isn't that
I mean,
serving a
it's
purpose?
serving a purpose. But I don't think, I don't know, because I don't think Satan is ever doing anything good. I think I don't think that's part of God's plan. God's plan was not to intend to have a place where, the people's souls are tortured for all eternity. Which really, I'm not really sure if that's what hell exactly is necessarily anyway. But I think it is the case that, God is able to reconcile things into his plan, but he never planned for that in the first place. I think my point overall is that, you don't have to do something inadvertently good to be welcomed back into God. I think that's the way that you're looking at it, is like, well, Satan's stuff served a purpose so he can be welcomed back to God. I don't think it did. I think
Oh, yeah, I'm not saying that.
Okay.
Explicitly. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that he may have he may have accomplished some things.
Mm. Sure. Satan accomplished some things. That's a good point there, Dad. But no, because my point is, I think that no matter how many bad things you do, it is always possible to be forgiven. It's just the vast majority of those horrible, awful people just do not choose. The door is never welded shut. You are never allowed back into God's grace. You just have to open the door. But a lot of people will just turn around and walk the other way.
Yeah. Well, it's hard.
Yes.
It's hard to acknowledge you've done something wrong.
Mm.
Like I've said before, when somebody criticizes me unfairly, like just completely off the wall, like call me names and say I did this or that, it doesn't bother me at all unless they're right. They're right. It's like, ooh, that stung, because it was true. And so I think there's some universal truth to that, is that if somebody tells you something, by the way, I'm going completely off topic.
Of course.
There's these these little YouTube video shorts that I watch. I shouldn't, but I do. It's in the evening, and there's that Whatever podcast. He brings on those gals, and now he's got these guys that are like, there was one guy, what's his name, Jeremy Wallen or something like that. He's like he's kind of like a Andrew Tate kind of character, and then he had that person on there, like 5 or 6 gals, these OnlyFans gals, and then he had Lila Rose, who she is,
yes,
pro-life advocate, and she asked this guy a good question, which I've been waiting for somebody to ask these men's rights advocates. Well, you espouse, and I'm paraphrasing, you'll look it up on Twitter or whatever, and you'll see it, because I think it was just released today or yesterday, and it's kind of going around. But anyway, she says something along the lines, well, you talk about devoting yourself to one person, but you're not doing that. You're fooling around on that person. Why don't you just, if you're gonna pair with that person, why aren't you true to her when you expect some loyalty out of her? And not doing a very good job explaining it. And he gives his answer, well, that's just the way I am, type of thing. And then with a very sweet voice, she says, well, you're a man of great self-control, and you work out, you're a business person, you do all these things well. Don't you think you can control those urges too? and then he kind of insults her and calls her annoying, and then she says, well, don't you think you have the capacity? Aren't you being, I forget what she called it, but it was like basically being weak. That he's not staying true to, basically he's just jutting around and screwing gals, and then then he's talking about how women are stupid and stuff, so it's like waiting for somebody who actually can speak from authority and not one of these glorified hookers, confronting these guys saying, not all women are trash, and your philosophy isn't the path to success either. At which I'm going to bleed this back into our story, because the next section of the book is the decline from Melkor to Morgoth, and his decline is, I think, focused, or maybe started with, his own self-centeredness. And not seeing, he's trying to impose his will upon the world and upon others, and that self-centeredness drew him away from doing good and being close to God. And I think there's a lot of that, even with people that are right about some things. It's like you have to have a certain amount of discipline and self-control and humility. And I think that's lacking from a lot of people. How do you like that segue?
That was a good segue. That was a great segue.
I can't even remember what my original point was for mentioning that excerpt, but
I have no idea.
I think it was something about choosing to do the wrong thing or something.
Yes, yes. Yeah, you can always come back and do the right thing, and then somehow you ended up there.
Yeah, well, I thought it was a good little story. You should
Yes,
check it
that's a good
out.
story.
It's really entertaining because she's so pleasant, but she's really sticking the dagger into this
Mm.
guy, and he could just tell he was stuck, and he just started insulting her, saying that she was annoying and she was like a little Miss Goody Two Shoes, which I thought was kind of funny. Anyway, so Melkor kind of devolved into Morgoth,
Mhm.
right?
Yes.
So how did that? I mean, how did that How did Tolkien describe that transition, and when did he change his name? Did he did
So
he did he go to the recorder deeds office and say I'm now registered as Morgoth?
no, not necessarily. No, not at all, actually.
Okay.
No, so this was, it happened over time essentially, but from the very beginning, like during creation, he was evil. He introduced evil into the song and everything like that. So it's like,
Yeah.
this was established. Then he, set up his fortress and whatever, and the gods chained him or whatever and stuff like that. But it wasn't until the elves came around that he got the name Morgoth. Because it was Morgoth who essentially put the pieces into motion that led to the stealing of the Silmarils, the magic gems of the Silmarillion. He left, and so it was from that point on, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that the elves started calling him Morgoth instead of Melkor, because Morgoth means the dark foe. If again, if
Right.
I'm remembering correctly, so it was just another name that was applied to him, explicitly calling him out, essentially saying that he is the most evil thing to ever happen to these people. So that was a name that was given to him by the elves, and that was the name that he was known as, thereafter.
All right. So Melkor Morgoth, Tolkien describes his blasphemous mockery of the designs of Eru,
Mm-hmm.
and Tolkien calls this sheer nihilism, since negation is its sole object. He's not creating anything.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, with Tolkien, the whole thing is, the purpose behind life is create life or create art. And that's an interesting way to segue into that. The Satan characters are always negating any sort of creativity. They're
Mm-hmm.
not doing anything, creating anything new. It's just nihilism. They're just destroying things. And that they're, if Tolkien would, go, the author describes him going on as this goal to negate it is futile, because neither matter nor the spirit can be destroyed. As if they'd never been, they can only be ruined.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what Morgoth is doing, is just ruining things, just
Mm-hmm.
pooping all over the world, basically.
And I think that's a lot of what you also see nowadays with a lot of like the anti-Christian or anti-religion people, is that they just immediately assume that anything that you say, if you are a Catholic, if you're a Christian, that whatever you say is just wrong, and they want the opposite of it without giving it any second thought. It's just pure negation. It's not even considering, okay, maybe this has some truth to it, even just outside of Christianity, outside of Catholicism. This could still hold true. They don't give it any thought. It's a lot of the time, if you say something, be like, well, are you a Christian? Do you believe in God? Okay, then I'm going to believe the opposite of what you say. I think
Right.
it's insane. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, then Morgoth, as he tried to, get more power, he was only able to control them through fear and force.
Hmm.
But that, and in Tolkien's telling of the story, it's just so ironic that the more he did that, the more his actual power diminished, and he
Mm-hmm.
ends up just being essentially a warlord with vast obedient armies of conquered slaves, which is something an immortal could achieve.
Mm-hmm.
Then he's afraid of everybody, and he's just living in his castle and having his slaves go about trying to execute his will for power. And it's just a great description of a descent into evil.
Mm-hmm.
And you think that you're trying to get more power, but oddly enough, you're becoming less and less powerful as time goes by, because you're almost a victim of your own success of evil plans, because now you're a prisoner in your own castle. You can't trust any of them. They're only serving you out of fear and hatred.
Mm-hmm.
So that whole storyline of the descent of the bad characters in all Tolkien's writings, you see this like descent into chaos and sorrow, really.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's especially interesting with such a powerful character who's like a god or an angel, essentially, because if he had just not done that, he would be, in eternal bliss. He'd be in union with God and with all these other angels, and he would have, literally the perfect life. He would be creating the entire time. Because he wanted to be higher than God, he has made himself basically the lowest out of all of these angels. It's like what he says. He's only accomplished what any other mortal could achieve. And now, sure, he has eternal life. He can't really be killed, but now he just sits in his castle all day, and he just has all these armies, and he has all these slaves, and he wanted to control everything. In the end, he can't even do what he wants to do. He can't even like leave this place. He doesn't trust anybody. He's just an evil despot, surrounded by wealth and people.
Yeah, and it's a morality tale, even for people that are just individuals in the world. The choices you make in life. You're going to be a creative person, and you create a success for people around you, and try to build people up, or you're just trying to aggregate wealth and power. And there's millions and millions of stories of people that, as they get older, they regret all those decisions they made, or transient success or power or riches. And of course, there's that all those stories that are basically like the three wishes from the genie. You had anything what you wish for, or those people that in real life that win the lottery and end up being miserable. And there's so many people win the lottery, end up going bankrupt.
Yeah, and I saw something on Instagram the other day, which I forget, what exactly it was, but it was essentially the sentiment of somebody saying, I don't remember, what extra project I decided to take on at work, that kept me home in those evenings, that kept me away from my kids. I don't remember what it was that I was working on, but I do remember that I wasn't there for my kids. That's what I do remember about that time, and my kids remember it too. And so it's that idea, sure, you might make a little more money this way, but what are you really doing with that time? You're just going to forget what even happened, 20, 30 years down the road, and you're just going to remember, oh, I wasn't there for, this soccer game or this, whatever, I should have been there for that.
And that's what I think is so compelling with the argument of these Andrew Tate characters, where they're talking about the women being submissive. They talk about like submissive women and all that, and it's not my cup of tea. But then when the ladies object, the guys go on these rants about, well, you're going to work in a get a degree, maybe a master's degree, maybe whatever you're going to do, and then you go out in the workforce, and you're going to have to work harder than everybody else to be successful. You're going to have to do the if they ask you to stay late, you're going to stay late. They ask you to come in the weekends, you're going to come in the weekends. And before you know it, what you really decided is that you've put aside your personal life and you've just submitted yourself to your job. Why don't you just submit yourself to a guy and use that time to take care of the kids? Which I don't agree with that argument, but it is a great argument to make. It really makes a lot of sense, because you're choosing a master.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be that fixed choice, is what I guess my point is. But when you are a career person, whether you're a man or a woman, you're making some compromises that maybe you're going to be happy with later, maybe you won't. But and now you've disappeared from my screen. I'm
still here. I had to plug in my laptop. I apologize for all you visual listeners out there who are seeing the footage. I just dipped down beneath the computer to plug in my laptop. But no, that is a good point.
You're not listening. No one is. Go ahead.
I was still listening. But that's a similar point. We had Abby Roth come up to campus a few weeks ago, who's the sister of Ben Shapiro. So she's sort of a right-wing, personality. She has a YouTube channel and stuff like that. But that was essentially the main point of her speech, as she was talking about, what happened where we were in this position where everybody just values a job over a family. How did we get here? And essentially her point was, we need to get back to that. We see so much improvement if we got back to this, traditional sort of family setting. And it's, what do you really gain if you just devote yourself constantly to work? You gain money, sure, but what do you get in the long run? You end up with no legacy, but and you won't be as happy if you don't have this sort of family.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's a couple things that are at play. And I think the biggest factor is that the wages for working class or middle class people have not kept up with inflation. And so you've gotten a situation where in order to really have what people in America would consider a middle class lifestyle, you have to have two incomes. And but when you do some of the math, the childcare costs are so high in most areas. It's like, you probably wouldn't have to sacrifice much to just have one person income to make the family run okay with certain other sacrifices. You're not going to get a new car, you get a used car, and you get to drive it to the ground like I do. But so I think there are certain income realities that I think are not acknowledged in that whole submissive, because you have to have if you're going to have one income, there has to be enough income to pay the bills, and that's what a big part of it is. And secondly, there's just a lot of societal pressure. If a woman does want to stay home, there's a kind of a self-imposed idea that, well, they're letting people down, that they should be doing more, that they're not, they're sellout or something like that. And that's a tough thing, because it's hard to get past that. But anyway, going back to where we were, which is Morgoth and Melkor and Sauron, moving to the next section about the liar and the tempter, which is really, and that's, actually leads into almost every discussion about modern society. As I get older, and maybe as our society gets more and more corrupt, I'm seeing more. I'm feeling like I'm seeing more evidence of actual demons and demonic activity. There's so many temptations, and there's so much manipulation to evil, and there's a lot of social media commentaries about how social media companies are manipulating people to be more reactionary and to attack each other, and I think it's like if Satan was going to come to life, it would be in the form of an AI program. I mean, that's how he's going to get returned to some sort of bodily form, is through an AI program where he's just manipulating all that we see and we experience, and then we're going to be the pod people like the Matrix, and working as his slaves. I mean, isn't that the same story as Morgoth and Sauron's ultimate plan is the Matrix? Isn't that really the end? Like if the ring wasn't destroyed, wouldn't the Middle Earth become the Matrix eventually?
I mean, essentially, it's Sauron's whole plan was domination, total control over everything. I think that's the point that you're making is eventually we would get there where it's just,
a mechanized, soulless existence, and
exactly.
And as Tolkien would say, the machines are not people. They're soulless creatures. They're evil. A form of destruction almost. And,
it's going back to that idea of the real robot factory being one of the least real things. It's right. As opposed to even like an imagined castle. It's that idea of the farther we get down this path of everything mechanized and tailored just to suit our every single individual need, the farther we get from actual creation and actual being, which is God and the natural world and stuff like that. And so it's. I think it is a good point that eventually we would get to the spot where everything is just, lying to us, is tempting us just to try and, get us to stay focused on, whatever's in front of us on the TV screen.
Right. Yeah. And anyway, I won't go to the social commentary. I'm going too far afield too often. Getting back to Tolkien's, real focus on this part of the chapter, which is really good. You have to go back through and read this in detail, because he's talking about Tolkien's Satan figure as the master liar, and that as he says here, and this is, I'm on page 220 in the middle of that page, he says, as a good hunter, he adapts his method depending on his prey and often approaches indirectly. That's a great analogy, because if you're going to try to manipulate somebody to do the wrong thing, you don't just come in up to them and say, hey, I'd like for you to do the wrong thing. And he continues, he does not, at least at first, simply tell us what he wants us to believe. The serpent in Genesis does not begin with, you will surely not die. You will not surely die. Instead, he offers a question of doubt. Did God actually say? It's a question mark. It's that kind of deception ends up being internalized on the
Mhm.
person who's deceived, and you want to, it's like it also plays on the person's desires to try to manipulate their desires into something that they know they should otherwise know that they shouldn't do,
Mhm.
convince themselves they should. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think C.S. Lewis makes that exact point really well in the Screw Tape Letters. If you've never read them, you should. They're in one of the totes of books that I brought home from Truman that are sitting out in the garage, I assume, or have been put
Oh,
somewhere in the house.
they're in the
Uh,
basement.
oh, that's good. Thank you.
We
But that's
enjoyed lifting those 500-pound totes of old books.
but
By the way, we have to mention that as we were going to leave to the airport, I looked at your backpack, which was just something you could carry on, and it would have to fit underneath the seat.
yes.
And I said, "Why? What is in there?" And you said, "Well, I got some few things, this and that, and a couple books." So, well, how many books do you have in there? Well, I have 5. I said, "What 5 books do you have?" Well, I have the book I'm reading now. I
Mhm.
have the book I'm going to read next, and then I have the next 3 in line. And then you remembered you had this Tolkien book in there, so
Yes.
you had 6 books in your backpack, and at least 3 of them were part of the Harvard Classics
Mhm.
books. I don't know, were 5 of them the Harvard Classics
No,
books? Or
three. I have the Tolkien book. I have the Decameron, and I have Fox's Book of Martyrs, which is interesting for a Catholic to read. But I'm kind of looking forward to it. But yeah, and then 3 of the Harvard classics.
Mhm. Anywho, so what were we
Yes.
even talking about? I
What was
want
I
to
talking about?
sideways
You
about reading.
completely just Screw Tape Letters. Screw Tape
You brought
Letters.
up your books.
I mentioned it as an aside, and then you cut it. The Screw Tape Letters. That's the point that he makes is these 2 demons. They're writing their correspondence. You need to influence this way, and the whole point is basically trick your target into thinking that it's his own idea. Get him in
Yes.
any way that you can into thinking, okay, well, this is just in my benefit. Let him just skip mass this one time. It's never like a direct attack of, worship Satan, do this, do this, do this. It's try and get him to talk to that person who's, a real, hardcore atheist and things like that. Try and get him just to stay home this one morning from mass. He doesn't need to go today. Try and get him to et cetera, et cetera. But it's always, these indirects, coming at it from different angles, never just, tell him to worship Satan.
And by the way, as you're saying that and you're describing that kind of manipulation, that is a very important tactic to learn as part of jury trial advocacy. You want the jurors to think that they've come to the conclusion, rule in favor of your client on their own. You're providing them with arguments and you're providing them with evidence, but you need to have it so that you're not just insisting that they rule. This is my problem when I was a young lawyer, is I would just insist that they would rule in my favor because it's the only logical option, of course. Well, that doesn't sell. They have to buy into it. You have to give them a story to believe, and that they are the hero of the story. And if you can convince them that ruling in favor of your client is their idea, and it makes them a hero of the story, you've won the case. And so it's one of the precepts of good jury manipulation is that you try to get them everything that they would need for them to decide that it was their idea to rule in your favor.
Interesting. I've never thought about that.
It's effective persuasion. No, you should do it honestly. You shouldn't be lying to them or whatever. But when you take like seminars or classes on how to convince a jury what to do, there's not a whole lot of morality discussions. It's just effective or ineffective. So I respect that, though. It's like, well, you make your own decisions. And if you're going to a seminar, you're just trying to find out how to do it. And if you're doing all the right things in the right way, then you're just getting them to the correct decision. But anyway, so back to the book and the discussion of the liars and deceivers. There's again a discussion of the Numenorians, and that Sauron manipulated them, and at the bottom of page 220 he mentions that he guilefully leads God's chosen people, the Numenorians, to manufacture a diabolical religion based upon a delusion, or based in a delusion or satanic lie. And man, if you're able to do that with these superhumans, you're doing something special, don't you
Yeah.
think?
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, but eventually it's sort of also the case that it was sort of a product of their society anyway at that time. Once Sauron came around and into the Numenorians, it's like, um, it's that idea that I think we've talked about this before, but it's like, Hitler. A lot of people think that Hitler somehow on his own,
Yeah.
convinced an entire society that this is the way to go, and it was him and him alone. No, not really. It was society was looking that way anyway. In Germany in the 1930s and stuff like that. And so it's not so much a question of, Morgoth or Sauron himself, tricking all these people. It's these people had already come to think of themselves so highly that they needed more than what they already had. They had already conquered essentially the what was kind of the known world. They were sort of plundering the coasts of Middle Earth and stuff like that. And they had, their beautiful, heaven on earth island in the
Yes.
middle of the sea, and they wanted more. They thought
Yep.
themselves to be the best in the world and they want more. And that just lays the pieces for Sauron to come at that time and just tip them over the edge. He didn't change them overnight. He didn't really change these people entirely. They were already going sort of in that direction anyway.
Yep. And the author mentions that on 221, but such is Sauron's craft and cunning that, led astray by subtle arguments, the devil worshipping people of Numenor seem to prosper materially, all while becoming spiritually bankrupt. And if that's not the United States right now, I don't know what it. Yeah, I think we are the Numenorians. I mean, we're such a powerful people, and through our material prosperity and our bad choices that lack character and vision, we're going spiritually bankrupt, and I don't know how to fix it. But anyway, there's a mention of references here, and they talk about when Gandalf finds the porter slain by Boragond. He calls it the work of the enemy who loves to pit friend against friend, confusing hearts and dividing loyalties. What is that story? Boragond, is that where is that one of the guys that was guarding Denethor?
Yes, Baragond was a captain. Was one of the what are they called? The guard of the Citadel. He's one of the guards of the Citadel. So he was sort of entrusted with protecting, the Gondorian royalty, and that included Denethor and Faramir. And he's the guy who essentially rescued Faramir from Denethor in the books.
In the books, the actual Tolkien stuff, as opposed to the Pippin going up there and getting Gandalf and all that stuff.
I believe so. Yes.
All right. Sounds righteous. I just put a little question mark next.
Well, I think Gandalf and Pippin were still there, but it was Baragond who had a lot of help in the situation. He's just entirely cut from the movies.
It's unfortunate. Anyway, so he mentions that Saruman is the quintessential Tolkienian tempter, as a sophist rather than a hypnotist. So he just uses words. He doesn't control you. And that's the nature of Tolkien's evil characters, is that they're not necessarily hypnotizing or putting people in trances, although it seems to have happened with that one guy from Rohan, I guess, to a certain. But mostly it's by tempting people or convincing them to join this alliance of the powerful against the other forces, and using their grievances to manipulate them to do bad things, right?
Yes.
And this one I thought was a great discussion at the top of 222, which talks about the lies and manipulation of the Sauron or Morgoth characters, but that in order to fight them or to refute them, he says at the very end of that section, paradoxically, honest and simple statements deceive him the most. Innocence wields the greatest power. And that is really, really true of bad people. If you are simply an innocent, good person, and you can just state, like if you went up to Biden, who I consider an evil person and always has been an evil person, and I don't know how he ended up getting elected, because back in 1988, the American people unanimously decided that he was an inveterate liar, which he was, and he got basically thrown out of the race. But he is completely flummoxed by somebody just asking him a very simple statement based upon the truth, and insists that he just answer honestly. And you see a little bit of that in Trump too. To be fair, if somebody just makes a declaratory innocent and simple, true statement to somebody that deceives a lot of people, it has this weird power and just deflates them, you know. But you can't engage in their deception and their arguments. It's just a simple, true statement. Don't you think that's true? There's a lot of truth.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think to tie it back to theology a little bit more, I think that's a lot of the story of the nativity. God could have come to earth in, any way he wanted to, because, he's God. He could have, appeared in light and, was shining and whatever. But no, he came like actually as a baby. And I think that's what you see with Herod. He hears that this king is born and he's like, well, it's a baby. What can it do? But then he's like, okay, I need to have everybody kill this child who's just somehow going to become a king. It doesn't make really any logical sense besides, really believing in this prophecy that, there's a king that's going to come who's going to rule all the kings. But at the end of the day, it's a baby. He wanted the three wise men to report to him the location of this baby so he could kill it. So he could kill, baby Jesus. It's this idea of, it's this pure innocence that, really just, enraged him. And I think, same thing, for a lot of stuff like that.
Yeah, true. Anyway, moving on to, unless you had something else to add there. The next section is satanic symbols, monsters, dragon, and shadow. And there's this is a pretty brief little discussion, but what I liked about it was the description of Sauron being much less physical and more of a spiritual threat than Morgoth. That he gets into people's souls and manipulates them, and that evil is primarily a spiritual and not a physical feature. And so with Tolkien's bad characters, I mean, I know he has dragons and being equated with greed and cunning malice and all that kind of stuff, but really it's the spiritual danger rather than the physical grotesque creatures. Don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. And especially, if you think about, what can you actually do to somebody physically? Like the worst thing that you could do to somebody is kill them, which is a horrible thing. But, especially for Christians, death isn't the worst thing that can happen to you necessarily, if that makes sense. The worst thing that can happen to you is to be, is to not go to heaven. That's an infinitely worse thing than just dying, because in dying, you do have that opportunity to go to eternal life. So I think it's that idea of, corruption of the soul is so much worse than just, marring of the physical body.
True. So the next section, the defeat of Satan.
That's a nice way to say that. Thank you for that.
Well, I was trying to figure out if he was saying Lucifer, or Morgoth, or whatever, but it's defeat of Satan, because I had already turned the page. So I don't even know what I want to say about this. Oh yeah, like how these bad characters in his writings just seem to wither away and almost to get extinguished. Like Sauron just ends as a pathetic shadow blown away by the wind when he finally passes away, as opposed to when he in the movie where he's thrust upon some sort of turning wheel and killed after he's stabbed in the back, which is more dramatic but less meaningful, I thought.
Yeah. Well, actually, this is kind of just a fun fact. That was to pay homage to Christopher Lee's early roles when he played Dracula in a lot of the Universal monster movies. And so he's impaled on a wooden spike that he's created, as part of this big, water wheel or whatever it is. And so that's sort of one of the inspirations for that in Peter Jackson's adaptation, which I think is pretty cool. And I like his death scene a lot. It's actually one of my favorite changes from the books is Saruman's death scene, just because of how cool it is. And I really like it. But no, I do think it's interesting. He also has a note on here as I'm kind of skimming through here. He says Sauron fails. He says the verb fail here is significant. Failure connotes deficiency, missing the mark, falling short of a standard. So it's not that Sauron is just defeated. He has, completely failed his entire, goal. He's not just been overturned. It's everything has ended for him. He's ultimately just lost. He has completely failed in whatever his mission was, and he's just achieved nothing, which I think is really, really cool. It's a really neat idea.
Yep, true. So the next section is demons, and starts with the discussion of Satan, the chief spirit of rebellion, bringing a third of the angels of heaven with him in his fall. That seems like a lot. Although I don't know how many there were. How many angels can fit on the head of a needle? I don't know. And then Satan basically perverts them to his own service, and basically he's just having them serve him and his purposes, although he manipulates them into believing they're they're doing the right thing, so to speak, and doing justice, because the mistreatment by God, I guess, is maybe one of the theories. And Tolkien characterizes lesser demons in his writings as being more capable of rational thought and deliberation than the Satan character himself. I guess because they would be less evil and less corrupted, and so they might be able to be more rational in thought, even though they are, agents of evil.
Mm-hmm.
And then, going on, the central qualities of a demon are not horns and pitchforks, but deception and destruction of the soul. And I think that would, of course, be more effective if you're trying to get people to go astray, because you're not going to follow somebody that has horns and a weird tail, I guess, unless there's some people around the world now who probably do it. I won't name names. or categories of people, but that a demon is irretrievably damned. That's what Tolkien says. Scripture states that demons will be imprisoned in hell for eternity, and offers no hint of the possibility of demonic repentance. That is true in the Scripture, doesn't it? I mean, if you're a demon, you're going to hell. You're cast in there forever, right?
I mean, I believe so. I mean, it's a complete, renunciation of God. I'm going to do the opposite of what God wants. I'm removed from him.
Yeah. And so the book continues to say, and since God holds out redemption to all for whom it is possible to repent, we conclude that demons are evil to such an extent that they can no longer desire the good in any coherent and effective way. Yeah. There's a description of how Tolkien views actual contact with demons as a demonic encounter, as a frightening knock in the door of one's consciousness, and that he believed that the demons wouldn't try to contact you in your sleep, which is different than other more ancient philosophers that thought that like the dreams is how they contacted you. And his view was that they're trying to manipulate your consciousness, and not just your physical body, and you're more attuned to your mental thought processes when you're awake, and so that's when they're trying to get you. Anyway,
I think it's also the case of they want you to choose evil. If they can influence like the world around you to get you to want to turn away from God, then they will, because it's a more effective way of doing it. If you just possess somebody, then it's not really their choice, and they might just go back to exactly what they were before you possess them. But if you convince them that this is the right approach, then they're gonna believe that, and they're gonna stick with that.
Yep. And then they mentioned again his belief in guardian angels. And that you should listen to him, and say, if you feel this feeling that like, oh, I better get out of here, that's your guardian angel trying to give you a message. And they mentioned this rejection of angelic protection puts one in a terrible state of danger. It's hard to know when it is. It's not like some winged creature is on my shoulder saying, "Get out, don't do it." But I guess you just have to be in tune. And I don't know if it was in here. I think it was in this part of this discussion, or maybe it's maybe a little later. He talks about, I think we talked about this last time, about you really have to shore up your spirituality so you're prepared for those kind of challenges. I don't know if it's in here. Yeah, like that's not in here. It's a little bit later, I think, talking about like Frodo being almost overwhelmed by the Nazgul and whatever words that they were saying, and then later when the ring is overpowering his will, he's able to reach it, instead of the ring, reach for that little golden sphere thingy, whatever the Galadriel gave him instead.
The file,
almost like a sacramental type thing. So he's able to, because even though he's weaker at that point, he's able to kind of train himself to understand that he can't resist it, and so he has to try a different strategy. Anyway, I think that's true. I think you need to be prepared for temptation, because if you're unprepared, you're going to go down the wrong path.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're more easily manipulated if you're not ready for the manipulation.
Yeah, it's an interesting point in here too that I'm kind of skimming along. As we're talking
about Hitler.
Talking about Hitler.
I
mentioned Hitler. And here's Hitler. Oh, he says Hitler's demonic influence led to his perversion of the northern spirit, which Tolkien so much admired in its nobler sense. which is very true, because Hitler was really weirdly into like, Norse mythology and stuff like that, we're the descendants of, blah, 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 and all that nonsense. That's something that is still around today. I'm kind of a mythology nerd. I'm a big fan of Norse mythology. But if you go around looking on the internet for long enough, just for like information about, Norse mythology, you will get onto actual neo-Nazi sites. Like, it's one of the easiest ways to accidentally stumble upon like neo-Nazi stuff is just to look up like Norse mythology related stuff. It's
Well, let me
wild.
give you some advice. If you're on neo-Nazi sites, you should close down the browser.
Yes, yes. No, that is, I don't stay on the neo-Nazi sites once I end up on one.
Don't click through. Don't go to their store. I don't know if they have stores. I'm a little taken aback that you've described easier ways to find neo-Nazi. I have never seen a neo-Nazi site on the internet. Now, granted, I'm not researching the Northern Spirit website, nor am I researching neo-Nazis, because I don't think there are really a whole lot of neo-Nazis. I think that a lot of them are Fed operations. And after like the Pride Boys trial, where half of them were revealed to be either FBI agents or FBI informants. I mean, half of the membership. I mean, it's crazy. So if you happen to run into a neo-Nazi on the street, strike him. He will know why. Anyway, that's an old joke, old Russian.
Yes.
Anywho, so where were we at? We're talking. I have a little mark next to that thing that you picked up on, because I thought that was something you'd want to talk about. But he talks about Hitler being. I guess Tolkien has addressed this during his lifetime, that he had not a demonic possession, but he had demonic influence, which caused him to pervert those philosophies and all that. And you mentioned, Hitler was at the front of the crowd, steering them in a direction or another direction, but that crowd was going in a bad direction anyway. And if you read the history of the German people at the time, it's not a big surprise that they started killing the Jews. I mean, let's be honest about it. And I'm not blaming every German everywhere at all time, but there's a subcurrent there, and it wasn't just hey, no, like nobody thought about blaming the Jews for anything, and all of a sudden Hitler got the idea. I mean, that's not how it happened. Anywho, the demonic in Tolkien's fiction. There's a reference, and I have a question mark because I don't know what it is. Page 227.
Yes.
Makar and Maisi. Who's Makar and Maisi? Do you know?
That is a good question, actually. So
the earliest lost tales. I don't know what the lost tales are.
So the Lost Tales, those are Tolkien's earlier writings that, were never published, during his lifetime and stuff like that. And I believe those were like two spirits, essentially of Morgoth, or of some of the Maiar that he sent with him. They're just more demons, essentially. They're more, satanic influences.
Well, the author seems to be going down a kind of a relatively unknown path about some of the lesser known writings. There's earlier, what he calls it, the legendarium of Tolkien.
Yes.
But he does mention that the northern myths, again, in a nod to the northern myths, Tolkien highlights pine forests as haunts for evil spirits. I wasn't aware that it was a thing.
Neither was I. That's new to me.
Because I think of pine forests as smelling good and being pleasant. I think pine. I don't know.
Maybe.
Yes. And then going on, there's another discussion on 228 about the orcs. Derived from the Anglo-Saxon word for demons, and there's a reference to a Grendel.
Yes, Grendel, the villain of Beowulf, the demon that attacks in Hrothgar's hall, and then his mother ends up being like the big bad. Then Beowulf kills a dragon later, but Grendel's sort of the demon or the monster of Beowulf.
Yeah. Okay. And then he's basically talking about different type of demonic characters, and like a warg is a demonic wolf, and he has a physical body. And then another discussion of Shelob or Shelob, or however you say that.
Shelob.
It gives us a further glimpse of Tolkien's notion of demonic psychology. Her eyes reveal an intelligence yet mingled with bestial delight, gloating over her helpless prey. That's a very nice turn of phrase there, I think.
That is a nice turn of phrase.
She releases them from her holding spell only so she can relish their panicked flight. That's a pretty good dramatic.
That is dramatic.
Ice there.
Yeah, to go back to the word orc there, though, I think this is very interesting. Sorry to cut you off, because he does have a note on this. This is derived from the ancient, or the Old English sort of word there. We do have it attested, essentially meaning just an evil thing. It's also, and you see that in, I think, Beowulf or some like actual Old English stuff. You see it a few hundred years later. Actually, I think early 17 or 1800s is when it pops back up in Bullfinch's mythology, where he's recounting this tale, it's part of like the legends around Charlemagne, who, there's a whole stories about his paladins or his knights, and the orc is actually a sea monster that attacks this woman, and it becomes an entirely different thing. So the word orc is very interesting. It's been applied to a lot of things, but now in the modern day, Tolkien has completely changed it to mean, his humanoid creatures that he has in his writings. That's what everybody uses it now, which is interesting.
Now, one of the other discussions I wasn't aware of was maybe I didn't remember it. At Cirith Ungol, there are watchers at the gates of the tower, and demons inhabit the stone bodies like a heathen idol and guards its domain. That's on 229. Do you know what that's talking about?
Yeah, so Cirith Ungol, it's somewhat alluded to in the movies. That's the big like tower that the big beam of light shoots up from, the Nazgul fly out of in the movies. And you kind of see that in those like gargoyles at the entrance to the bridge, and you see like, the shots sort of pan up to them, but it's like sort of, there's a clearer idea of something is inhabiting those stones and preventing them from going into this place, or tempting Frodo to go towards there and bring them the ring. And that's what that's talking about there.
All right. Yeah. Because when they're right before they go up like the thousand stairs.
Yes.
That scene. Okay. Well, that makes all right. So then there's a discussion starting in 230 about spiritual warfare, which is actually what I was talking about earlier. That there's an ongoing conflict between God's angels and the powers of darkness. This ongoing spiritual warfare that we're participants in, and that demonic attacks most frequently take form of compulsions or influences upon the will. And the example they gave was that Weathertop, which I talked about, and then later in the Morgul Vale. Held by some external forces.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was wrong. Minas Morgul is the big tower with the bright green stuff. Cirith Ungol is the tower at the end of the hidden stair, where they have the orcs fight each other and Sam has to rescue Frodo from. But it's the same sort of idea. There's some sort of like stone structures there that are forbidding Sam to enter. So I apologize. I was mistaken.
I am embarrassed for you.
Yes, thank you.
So where was I at?
You're talking about the Morgul Vale.
So then, Frodo, totters towards Minas Morgul, and basically there's a discussion of how, you have to be prepared for the spiritual warfare that's going on, and if you are prepared for it, you'll be able to resist it. I think more strongly. I think that's the point of this passage.
Yes.
Yeah. So like at the top of 231, Frodo moves instead to touch the sacramental star glass that gives him relief from the temptation and the crisis pass. And then but he goes on to say, not all spiritual warfare is conducted so pointedly. It often can be more subtle and gradual. And once Tolkien writes of Frodo that the ring may have aided Frodo's choice to go towards Mordor, here the spiritual warfare is subtle. One cannot tell where one's own will ends and where the temptation begins. And then it talks about Amenhotep and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's a good point, that you need to be prepared for that stuff. And of course, then the question is, well, how do I get prepared for spiritual warfare? And pray, I guess. Yeah.
Pray and trust in God, I suppose.
Yes. So what else do we want to talk about in this? This kind of goes on for a while. There's examples.
Yeah, the idea of spiritual warfare is interesting. I've never really thought about it in the context of Tolkien, but I guess it does pop up again and again and again and again, where it's this idea of, well, especially with the ring, of course, with that direct temptation there. But it's an interesting idea of that, there are these, outside spiritual forces affecting you. One's trying to pull you one way, one's trying to pull you the other. And I think it's an interesting concept to look at. It's that big question of how do you be prepared for that? Because, it's something that undoubtedly will happen. And so it's, what do you do besides just pray a whole bunch? And I guess that is the answer. And
how can you not have thought of the spiritual warfare angle in the Lord of the Rings, where it's literally a struggle for the soul of Frodo as he's trying to destroy the evil ring of power?
I've never thought about it from the other side of where the good is coming in. I've always seen, of course, the heavy temptation themes and stuff like that. But spiritual warfare implies, there's the other half, the good that is also fighting for your soul. And so,
Well, yeah,
it's
that's the whole theme of the whole thing, isn't it?
well, I mean, but there's not as
You
many clear examples of that, is what I'm saying. At least in the
there's
first
not a
reading.
lot of direct spirituality. That's true
Yes,
because
yes.
they don't pray really because
Mhm.
they don't really pray to a god.
Yes, no,
And
I know one of the central themes of the Lord of the Rings is temptation and evil and fighting for your soul and stuff like that. But I don't think it's too central of a theme of where the good half comes in. That's also fighting for your soul. I don't think that really makes too much of an appearance, except in select occasions as he's highlighted here. But I think it is a good point. I think it is a theme that is in there.
yeah, um, well, I think it's expressed more as uh, love and self-sacrifice for
Mhm.
others, betterment of humankind, including humans, elves, and hobbits and
Yes,
dwarves.
yes,
But
sure.
so, but yeah, you're right. It's not overtly spiritual warfare on the defense side of it. Yeah, I
Mhm.
think you're right. I guess that's a good point. I'll concede that you might have had a good point.
Thank you. I appreciate it. That's fantastic. Um,
Um,
but would you?
what I one last thing, I thought it was really great how he talks about how Gandalf was rebuking the demon,
Mhm.
uh, the Balrog at the bridge of Khazad-dûm with words modeled after an exorcism, which is
Mm.
true.
Mhm.
Back to the abyss and nothingness of which you came. Isn't that from an exorcism? I think it is.
It does sound like it.
Anyway, in conclusion, I think we're at the end of the line. It's been a
Yes.
long episode. I thought it was gonna be short.
But I mean, I enjoyed hearing your discussion of this chapter. I was going to say I enjoyed this chapter, but I didn't read it, unfortunately. I apologize, Austin Freeman, who's undoubtedly listening, an hour and a half in or wherever we're at this point. But
I
no,
think
no,
should play with the idea of me not reading next chapter.
nope, absolutely. You're the one leading the discussion. That's not going to
Oh,
work.
all right.
But no, I think this is all good discussion. I'm going to read this in my own time, of course, because I love this book and I love all the discussions so far. But no, it's an interesting concept of where exactly Satan and demons fall in, and of course Morgoth and Sauron are very satanic figures. But it's nice to see it sort of spelled out more in depth here. To look at it really fully in a theological perspective. It's really cool. I really liked it.
Yes, I think it's now time for you to go to bed. You got work in the morning.
Yeah, it's currently 10 p.m. for me as we're recording. I'm an hour ahead of you. So yeah, it's pretty close
Long
for me
day
to
for you.
go. Yeah, to go to sleep.
Yeah.
Yes. Any other final thoughts on this chapter?
No,
All right. Well, this has been season 5, episode 9 of Unlimited Opinions. I've been Adam Bishop,
I'm still Mark Bishop.
and you can, of course, follow us on Twitter at ULMTD Opinions. ULMTD Opinions.
All right. That was good.
That was good.
You should not read more often.
I don't think I should. I think I should have more thoughts on the chapter before we come into it.
I thought you did great.
Oh, thank you.